How often and in what ways do you come in contact with people who have mental health diagnoses at work or personal life?
Um, Currently, not so much. More so back when I was practicing law regularly, and I'd say it was a couple, 2, 3 times a month.
Mm-hmm.
I would, in the course of representing clients who were mentally ill or their children were mentally ill, kind of thing.
Okay. Did you receive any kind of education or training on mental health disorders? If so, what? Who sponsored it? Was it required or optional? And would you like more?
I did not, and it would have been very helpful to get some. eh, I took some psychology classes in college,
Mm-hmm.
and actually had a friend who was a psychologist. I probably learned more from her than I did from any of my psychology classes.
What two disorders do you wish you knew more about and why? Bring.
Um, Bipolar. I wish I knew more about that. I think generally cluster B personality traits, and reason being, I've had a couple people that loved ones who suffer from that,
Okay.
and wondering if there's anything that can be done. Doesn't seem like it,
Yeah.
and it just kind of continues in their life. Their life is a total mess, and I wonder and wish that there was some medication or treatment that they could avail themselves of.
Right. What mental illness have you dealt with most?
Um, I don't know because I don't diagnose it,
Right.
but I would guess probably bipolar, and that one is I think related to a lot of the addictions that are out there these days,
Right.
and people destroy their brains with alcohol and drugs, especially the synthetic drugs. And that's where I think in this business and law enforcement, we're seeing a lot more of it, a lot of more prevalence of that kind of a mental illness.
Right. Like, like, is there like a certain signal that you know if that person is bipolar is gonna flip at like a random time or?
Usually, the people I've seen, the when you typically know or you have an idea is when they're high, and not high on drugs, but high on life,
Yeah.
and they're on top of the world. And I've never felt as good as I feel now, and that kind of a high usually gets followed by a complete crash
Right.
and a severe depression. But I've seen it many times.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have a client. I represented his business, and I would see him every 6 months or so, and he would gain 100 pounds and then lose 100 pounds, and his life would be total crap, and then his life would be wonderful. Everything's
Right.
the best it's ever been, and it's like, why can't life ever just be okay with you? It has to
Yeah.
either be all or nothing. 100% great or 100% bad. And it was because he was bipolar.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the definition is. You're one extreme or the other,
Mm-hmm.
and you're all in all the time. The other thing is, with that, you see a lot of clinical depression.
Yeah.
People who, especially with again, drug and alcohol, people who can't control their alcohol use or, any kind of drug use, in my opinion, and they, they exacerbate the problem with their depression. It's a big problem.
So like if you're dealing with someone like on a really severe crash, how do you kind of calm them down in that situation?
There's really no way you can. They need to get in with a medical professional,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to get on some stabilizing medication.
Right.
All you can do is and I used to do a lot of work in this area. It's called harm reduction model. And I used to work for an organization that helped people who were mentally ill and severe alcoholics and severe addicts And they were in most housing developments, like homeless shelters, that kind of thing, have a zero tolerance policy where you can't use or drink.
Yeah.
But this place allowed people to drink under certain circumstances, and the harm reduction model is they're going to drink anyways.
Yeah.
At least they're not doing it out on the sidewalk in January. You know, they're doing it in the confines of a medical facility where we have trained medical professionals. So that's all you can really do with people with severe mental illness. You can't really calm them down per se, but what you can do is keep them from hurting themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to, you know, help enable them long enough to get them to a medical facility.
Yeah.
Somebody's coming down on severe alcoholism withdrawals, could kill them. And if you try to just make them detox without any medical help, it could kill them.
Yeah.
So,
is there like anything specific that you've dealt with, like that you were able to make that person feel safe or normal in a way? Mm-hmm. Like to an extent, like not like to go too broad, but
yeah.
Or like even after like you dealt with them while they're on their crash, they're uncontainable, but they come back to you and say, "Hey, thank you for what you did." Or
not really, no. Wish I could think of an example, but no. You know, the best you can do is again just keep them from hurting themselves more, and you know, try and get them the help they need.
Yeah. Are they kind of like a danger to everyone's safety too? Or
They
mainly
be,
just themselves?
Especially if they have children.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges you face when dealing with people who have mental illnesses?
The biggest challenge is that our healthcare system is ill-equipped to deal with it, and you know, it's a revolving door at the hospital, and they'll get them in, they'll stabilize them, and send them out.
Right.
And the last thing you should do to somebody who has suicidal ideation is get them stabilized and send them on their way. You need to address it, otherwise they're going to go off and they're going to, complete the deed.
Right.
So the biggest challenges.
Mm-hmm. Is it super common in law enforcement to deal with different types of mental illnesses?
Yeah, it's getting even worse. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot more training as you progress in your career, because it's getting to be, and I think a lot of it again has to do with the drug use. Right. And the types of drugs, the synthetic drugs. People are just frying their brains with stuff nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, South Dakota's. I'm from South Dakota. The meth problem is huge there, and you know, in my town I could go out the door and get meth easy if I wanted. And
yeah, I hear it's heroin.
Yeah.
I've been surprised to hear that heroin's on the rebound. But it always starts, with the smaller stuff, the weed, the synthetics, and it always progresses. And before long, that stuff doesn't get you high anymore. So then you're, stealing benzos or, oxys.
Mm-hmm.
And then that doesn't work anymore. And it's hard to get. What's not hard to get is meth or heroin.
Right.
It's easy to get, it's cheap, and it's potent. It'll get you high. But then after a while, heroin doesn't work either, and it just ends up leading to overdose.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, too, with that is people who had a habit or an addiction, but a habit that they would take this many in a day. And that's been built up, tolerance over a course of a year or two or longer.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get sober, and then they relapse, and they start out their very first day by taking 12. Well, then they die because their body isn't ready for that kind of a shock. And I think that's I think that's what happened to Prince, was that he was taking opiates. I forget which one he had, fentanyl or something like that. And it was just an accidental overdose because he took, I don't know if he forgot that he'd taken one previously, or he went dry clean for a while and then came back, but then took as many as he took when he had high tolerance.
Yeah.
And it just, stopped his heart.
Mm-hmm. So do you think like people with mental illnesses are more susceptible to like getting into drugs and having a drug addiction?
I think it's symbiotic. I think people are more susceptible to getting into drug addiction when they're mentally ill, but they're also more susceptible to becoming mentally ill when they have drug addiction.
Okay.
So it's they're hand in hand,
Right.
addiction and mental illness.
Is it more difficult to deal with a stubborn normal person in law enforcement or one with a mental disability?
Far and away mental disability.
Yeah.
There's just no rational thought.
Mm-hmm.
You can't calm them down. You can't use your tools of de-escalation. I don't know if you guys have learned that yet, but you can't de-escalate somebody who's not rational.
Right.
And they're just going to be flying off the handle. Sometimes all you can do is talking to Wiedemann. I can never remember which one. They're twins. They're both second years, Hope and Faith. And she's a correctional officer. And I said, "What are you going to do with a mental ill person? Tase them?" She's like, "Yeah." Guy's covered in feces. He's eating toilet paper, and he's trying to harm me. I'm going to take it. But yeah, way more difficult. With stubborn people, sometimes you can at least get through.
Right. Is it so like when you're dealing with someone who has a mental illness, does it usually lead to kind of a brawl or?
Yeah. Hopefully you can take them down without too much of a brawl or too much harm. And that's where a lot of the news stories you see where police kill a guy who is mental illness almost every single time. The guy was waving a gun, looks like suicide by cop, but they were just completely irrational. Right. What's a cop supposed to do? Sit there and get shot because you feel bad for the guy?
Uh-huh.
And then of course they get criticized and sued and all this other stuff. You should, and that's where the press keeps hammering away at the police. You need to learn better ways to deal with mentally ill than just tasing and shooting.
Right.
Okay, you tell us how then. Nobody's giving me any good ideas.
Yeah. So like, since officers are around people with mental illnesses pretty much every day, and it puts a toll on them, do you think a cop can get a mental illness kind of from being around it so much?
Yeah, I think that's a real problem, and it comes out in the statistics on alcoholism and divorce that you see in law enforcement. I think it's a real problem when you're dealing with people like that every day to keep your hopes up and stay positive.
Right.
You have to have a really strong will or strong personality to not let that get to you.
Is there like a way that you could kind of settle that down, maybe like a counseling group? Do you think like counseling groups would help police officers?
Yeah, I think that'd be, and they do exist, and I think there should be more of that.
Right. For me in the future, do you have any advice on what to do with like a mental disorder? Or
I would say get as much education as you can in service trainings on dealing with mentally ill people, and you could even volunteer at facilities where there's mental illness treatment, so you can get to understand the big picture.
Yeah.
Just we live in a sheltered society, and most of us never deal with mentally ill people.
Right.
So trying to get some exposure to that would be helpful.
Okay. I got a couple more, but I don't think of them.
How far are we?
Oh, I'm done with those now. Came up a little short.
I think that's probably okay.
Okay.